I'm not doing this, comma, because I don't want to scare you, end quote. Michael Moore, in a recent talk last night on his Facebook Live, gave a pretty raw, it's really Michael Moore raw. I have never seen him so intense in his warning to the next phase of American history, leading up to the presidential inauguration on January 20th of President Biden-elect, and the danger that Michael Moore is snooping and investigating in of what probably could happen. He's predicting it will, and he's warning the American public, and of course he's mainly warning his fan base on his Facebook Live. Just if you don't know Michael Moore, I really just will say very briefly, you can look him up, has been around 35 years plus even goes back to his childhood in school. He's always been interested in politics, and especially a left, liberal and left to the radical side of an agenda to bring, justice, basic justice. He's quite a humanist in that way, but also ecological justice and any other kind of important ethical way of living in the world and good citizenship. Very committed person. Michael Moore, he's produced, most well known internationally for his great films, which I think are documentaries, and some people call them docudramas, part fact, perhaps part fiction, but I do a lot of that in my own work. I'm interested in Michael Moore and these films, starting with Bowling for Columbine, which was on the 1999 high school mass shooting, and then his analysis of that. And since then, he's done analysis on many in his films and books, even on the corruption in mainly American politics is his focus. January 6th, 2021, the world saw on certainly media this violent attack on the Capitol Hill. Several people killed, including a policeman and Capitol Hill policeman. So many controversies. This is a very tense and raw time, so it's appropriate Michael Moore would do this raw talk, which I will link below. And both myself and many others also want to take a look at everything that everybody says, in terms of not everybody, but the serious players who have media attention. I've been following Marianne Williamson, for example. I think another really important voice, along with the likes of Michael Moore, on how are we going to get through and beyond this American crises that's going on. And again, I say American crises, it's really a world crisis. Many people have said, well, this is the new revolution, and the people involved in the assault on the Capitol Hill to try and steal the votes and stop the voting, and try to keep their president, Donald Trump, in place against all voting and democratic processes. Their right to demonstrate, not their right to, obviously destroy and do what they do. However, many freedom fighters throughout history see themselves, and they have people who support them and see themselves as just that. And others, like Michael Moore, Marianne Williamson, of late, their responses to this January 6th event and tragedy, really, but their response has been to label these people as terrorists, domestic terrorists, and violent by any other name, and of course, breaking the law by any other viewpoint. They did break the law in many ways, and seriously. Michael Moore believes and says in his very raw talk every one of them should be arrested who entered the White House and caused damage, terrified people, etc. Yes, people were terrified. Their initiative was of many fold. These right-wing extremists, for the most part, we could call them, they will not necessarily use that label, of course. They have labels they use that are proud. They're proud to be who they are. And that's, their right to do so. Left-wing, opposite type rebels, freedom fighters have also done all kinds of things, including damage to property, sometimes damage to and killing people. Things happen in mass protests that turn into very specific plans also to do damage and interrupt and stop the norm mainstream. So I'm interested as an educator. That's my primary work, and I'm also an educator who's critical, and that means I'm interested in the emancipatory and liberation traditions. I won't go into that because I want to put this video of the focus on my response to Michael Moore. So talking to Michael Moore now this morning, and I will talk to whoever else will listen. How did I get to Michael Moore? His Saturday night talk was through Marianne Williamson. I just have completed a 2-year study, although I've been studying her work for probably 20 years or more. I think she did a Twitter yesterday and linked Michael Moore and this speech he gave, his raw speech. And it's a letter to Americans. It's a letter to, I think he's sending it to all Congress members. A warning, dire warning of the emergency that is going on and will continue to be a danger to, he says, everybody, and democracy itself in America. Marianne Williamson is not someone, as I studied her very carefully. The book coming out is The Marianne Williamson Phenomenon, Cultural Revolution in a Dangerous Time by Peter Lang. In the next probably weeks, or it will be out on the bookshelf. That she's never referred to Michael Moore other than probably very casually, which I no doubt she supports his approach to activism and a left agenda in American politics, and just his dedication and love for his country and the people, as he says, is what I love the most. In his talk, he gives a little story about his pledge to allegiance, and he said in grade 6, he asked the teacher, he says, how come we have to pledge allegiance to the flag and first? And he says, I want to put the words in, I pledge allegiance to the people of America. Michael Moore does this, and that's a gesture that Marianne Williamson often does as well, in her love for our country and the people and the American Constitution, which she deeply loves. Anyways, Michael Moore is not someone she links with in public, and that interests me, and it tells me that she is seeing a really dangerous, and she is very raw right now in her talk, again, about the January 6th event, to me kind of an equivalent of 9/11 in another way, but this time it's from the inside. Yeah, this is deeply traumatic to so many people and Americans. This is in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of really scared people. So be prepared. She says, Michael Moore says, and I'm saying, be prepared, people. Now is the time to be open-minded and think well, creatively. And I will promote here, as I talk about Michael Moore's speech, a fearlessness perspective compared to what I see. He still takes a fear-based perspective. Now, he won't think so, but here is how he started his talk on repeating. Why is Marianne Williamson first not linking with him and him with her, as they are really important left leaders of the progressive camps is that Michael Moore is not into spirituality per se, although he says, God bless you at the end of his talk. And Marianne Williamson is totally into the spiritual based paradigm, her politics of love. She would link him. Michael Moore would never link to Marianne Williamson. I've said this before, just like Democracy Now!, which covers progressive left agendas as a radio program, a very successful now TV program, I should say. And Amy Goodman would never interview Marianne Williamson. She's met Marianne Williamson during the campaign run that Marianne Williamson had in 2019, but they would never interview her on their program. And that's a kind of divide within the left, which Marianne Williamson is very concerned about. Michael Moore is concerned about the division within the left, but he's not that much. And they're both Bernie Sanders, supporters going way back. And in 2016, both probably met and were supporting Bernie full force for his campaign for presidency in that election 2016, which didn't happen. But Michael Moore starts his paradigm. I would still say it's fear-based, even though he says, I am not doing this, sharing this story, because I don't want to scare you. Well, that Michael Moore can say whatever he wants about that. His actual actions will show something different. So is it fear-mongering that he's doing? I've said at times in my videos, I've done many videos on him. You can check my YouTube channel on Marianne Williamson as well. And I will say at times they slip into a fear-based structure. And that's just going to exacerbate the fear problem, the massive culture of fear dynamic that's going on. Okay, we all have faults, we all have weaknesses. Let me give a few strengths to Michael Moore before I kind of go in and pull some of the things apart. Not his sincerity by any means. That to me is quite untouchable of his commitment and his career as a really important political voice in America and probably the world. Certainly has infected my life in a very positive way. Thank you. Okay, so really good strength is he uses humor generally, virtually no humor in his raw speech last night. I don't think you can listen to an hour of Michael Moore anywhere, he was on for an hour, without a little bit of humor. Well, he maybe had a tiny little bit at the end of his really quite terrifying speech when he basically said, okay, now I'm going out to, takes a breath, going out to watch a virtual movie with a couple of my buddies. That's what we do every once in a while. And then Monday morning, going back to work, and he's encouraged everyone to go and call their people, call the representatives of government. And that's very typical Michael Moore prescription for stay active in politics, people. And I think that's good advice for everywhere in every country. To be passive is going to basically let these very strong forces in, like the ones that broke into the Capitol and tried to stop the inauguration process, counting of the votes on January 6th. So his strength is he's quite charismatic. He has this great sense of humor, and he's poignant in saying things that most people don't speak. So like Marianne Williamson, speaking truth to power, that is really their forte. Okay, all great things. The other thing Michael Moore has is he's a good researcher. And I have done a video on his research and support him and Jeff Gibbs in their movie on the ecological issues of the day and so on. You can check that out. But he goes after truth, and he's willing to disrupt even the ecological movement and saying basically, we're all caught in illusion. You better start listening to the truth of solar energy, and all these alternative energies are not going to save the planet. Now, Michael Moore is never a pessimistic downer, and he says very clearly, don't give up. So that's another strength. All these years of his fighting as an activist, he always encourages people not to give up. He lives that. I have no doubt. I think the only questions will be is, what does it mean, don't give up? I'll come back to that. in my critique section. Another strength he has is that as an investigator, professional that way, and with a lot of street smarts, he has major contacts in the undercurrents, underbelly, if you will, of American politics. And he's built those over a long year. You have to when you're a journalist or documentary filmmaker. And he's got them. And he tells, I think, the most important part of the intro of his talk is that he has been interviewing people after January 6th. Of course, he's interviewing people probably even before that of the buildup, and because he's basically arguing, like Marianne Williamson and many other critics, that everybody, a lot of people, knew that this huge march, 40 to 50,000 people on January 6th, was coming, and they were ready to do what they needed to do to stop the election, and they would do anything to do it, more or less. So that was all known. Michael Moore knew, others knew, and Michael Moore did more research after January 6th, which I think is his real strength, and he's been interviewing people both in the White House itself, in different sectors of society. He's checking out what went on underneath that's not in the mainstream media, as he argues, for the most part. I won't go into that and spoil what he has to offer there in his insights. They shake you a bit, for sure. That's typical Michael Moore, to shake us up, shake us out of our asleepness and passiveness and or optimism that may not be grounded in realities. Although he says, I don't know the truth, I don't know the realities, but from the facts I've gathered in all these interviews with security people and people in the White House and so on, of what went on that day and before and now after, he's saying we're in really serious trouble. These terrorists, quote in his language, they're back and they're still there. They're still in Washington. They're still mobilized. They're still planning, and they will attack again. And they even have a poster out now telling that they're going to have an armed march across the streets of America in every capital of every state is their plan, and they will go after the White House again. Anyway, more details there of his investigations. He's not saying they're the truth, but he's saying I've also predicted from my research that after Columbine, there would be many more high school mass murders because of gun control problems and the way Americans' attitude in the culture of fear and how they reproduce that kind of energy and et cetera, et cetera. And he says, I also predicted that Bernie Sanders, would not win the 2016 election in all likelihood. And that this other very disgruntled, disillusioned part of the population, especially on the right, they will mobilize and probably vote in Donald Trump. True enough. So he's kind of saying, take what I know seriously, and I certainly do. So let's get down to now the final part of my video presentation today, and it's only a small scraping of the surfaces of my concerns, and always have been my concerns and challenges to Michael Moore. As a fearologist, I want to meet Michael Moore. I've offered to at different times speak and try to connect. Of course, he's like most people, like Marianne Williamson, they're not that interested in connecting with people that are not biggies and not directly, easily for them, people who would advance their cause. Fair enough. I'm disgruntled about that a bit, but I'm not going to play sour grapes around it. They're too important, and the work that we're doing, the liberation work that they're doing and I'm doing, even though we have our differences, should never be sacrificed by petty personal disgruntledness. Some of the weaknesses in Michael Moore I've said before, but it needs to be repeated. He's a good artist in that sense of working the culture artistically, because he's such a great storyteller and you'll see it in this 1 hour presentation. He can really get to people, many people, not just the extreme left, because he's more popular than that. And again, like Marianne Williamson, very good at telling a story in rhetoric and building a case and getting people's hearts out and emotions out, and then, okay, now let's kick ass. Let's go kick ass, kind of thing. But his weakness is that as an artist, he sometimes is not a good educator. As an activist, he is not, which he's very good at as an organizer and promoter of activist issues. Um, no doubt about it. And however, like all activists, mostly 99% that I've ever met, and I've met many, I've been part of activist camps ever since I was a late teenager, off and on, and I find them narrow-minded. And that's, I have to say, after listening to Michael Moore, I came back and said, he's narrow-minded, still close-minded. This is not, a severe criticism of his person, his personhood, but his strategy, his way of organizing, his paradigm, if you will, his worldview, as well intended and brilliant as it is in so many ways useful. Michael, it's just really close-minded, and I can tell by the whole speech, there's this kind of Americanist centric, and I find this in Marianne Williamson as well, and in many others that I listen to in America, because I'm Canadian, so I always have this little bit of distance, even though I've lived in America. My wife is half American, half Canadian in citizenship. But I watch very carefully the construction of the narrative, the story, the prescriptions, and just the whole thinking. And I keep going, wow, open up those boundaries for people. You're so insulated. Generalizing about this Americanist kind of love of country, love of the promise of the country. We are great. And you get this insularity that they're just like, oh, I want to talk to people in other countries, and now is a really good time when America's in this really dangerous crisis, up to the inauguration and post, and a virtual civil war, many people are saying, is going on, and domestic terrorism that's going to, probably fragment the country, or at least put it under great pressures with the pandemic on top of it. And you really got to wonder if the economics of that country is going to just completely crumble very soon, within 21. All that true, and all that excitement and energy and intensity that he has and insight, I never hear him reach out. You won't hear it in the talk to other countries, to other nations, to reach out to the most brilliant thinkers, to the most brilliant activists right now, and say, yeah, I'm organizing, the best thinking I can. So here's an educator, you can hear me. Liberation educator. I go, no, when you're in the worst time, don't be shelling in, on how great you are, and you're going to defend the greatness of, your country or democracy or whatever symbols you use for, that which you want to defend. No, reach out. Defense, it has to happen, and it'll be happening on different levels, right from the military to the police forces. And of course, he's incredibly skeptical of all that now, and more and more. And I think rightfully so. There's really disturbing facts and things going on that he brings out about those security forces. However, okay, we'll get outside of America. Don't try and solve the problem. Everything is a little bit like Einstein said. We can't solve the major problems that we have by the same kind of thinking, worldview or frame we have that created those problems in the same first place. And the analogy could be, Michael Moore could have come out and said, we can't solve these American problems that Americanist thinking has created in the first place. Whoa, yeah, that would be a shift. That would be a beginning of an opening of porosity to the rest of the world. I'm not saying he doesn't look at what's going on in the rest of the world. We know a lot of Americans do, probably a lot of these people who were up on the White House, carrying all their different kinds of flags, including the rebel flag, Confederate flag, and so on, who want to turn over the government in this insurgency process that they're involved in. They probably don't open to the rest of the world. They're very Americanist too. So, but what I'm saying is Michael Moore's Americanist close-mindedness, in that sense of what I'm speaking to here, um, is actually the very same kind of close-mindedness of his opponents, of his enemy, who he wants all locked up. Of course, the other weakness is Michael Moore. Yes, that's nice to say. And I hear activists on the left and other liberal people say this about, you know, they're criminals, put them all. Michael Moore even says, these crazies, is raw talk. What kind of language is that? What kind of truth and reality is that if you're supposed to be speaking truth? The truth is you can't arrest 40 to 50,000 people who aided and abetted that attack on Washington. You know, if you really want to rip what he said apart, I'm not going to do that now. That would be tedious and would be really a waste of time in some sense. But the point I'm making that I think makes sense, at least from my point of view, is you can't just go out and arrest them and put them all in prison. First of all, and you don't trust the system of prisons, security anyway, and police. So why would you expect Michael Moore they're going to go and arrest them all? And there's not room to. You can't afford to. I thought he might see through that, but right now he seems pretty scared himself, and he doesn't want to scare other people, as I opened with the quote. So as I wrap up scene 2 here, which is the last scene of my video, I won't be doing more scenes. I have put a blog up recently after January 6th, and I knew things were definitely, when I heard just even the most fragmented news, because I don't watch the news very much, of the event of that day, I knew something was off. I knew something was off in the whole way security handled that situation. I knew, as Michael Moore insists, and others, it's an inside job. This is really deeply terrifying to think about when you think you're in a stable society somewhat. Not that Michael Moore is innocent or naive about that, but he seems even, more shocked or something. And of course, he's sharing this video with a whole lot of people, and what effect is that going to have on them? And he really doesn't have any solutions to that. That's part of his weaknesses, I find. He just will put out, we're all endangered. But he says then there's more of us than them. And that's his way to try and make people feel hopeful. Kind of weird, that kind of language, and it's so militaristic language. It's not even funny for somebody who's then talks about, for the sake of peace. I'm quoting him in this talk. So it's just those contradictions, I'm for peace and for the sake of peace. We must stop this madness, end of quote. So you don't have peace with your enemy by, calling them mad, calling them a mob, calling them terrorists, and calling them. The left should know this, Michael Moore. Come on. After Seattle, 99, and so on, after 9/11, all the left activists, were constantly being arrested and or called terrorists. And you all hated it, rightfully so, because it's such a label that they can do anything to you basically once they name you something, the authorities. Well, now you're doing the same thing to these right activists who are standing for what they believe. Oh yeah, they are. Look, they're no different than you and what you represent. Oh yeah, they're different. But at one level, they're no different. So it's not like I'm being ignorant about there's differences. Of course there is. And one can make all kinds of ethical and or, spiritual and or political judgments about that difference. But hey, they're American citizens. And hey, yeah, they are now getting called terrorists at every move they make. Well, you think, Michael Moore, you might not want to use that term and label too easily, too simply, because you know what it does to people. It diminishes them. And you diminish people, and they'll be back twice as hard. This is one of Michael Moore's weaknesses. I've seen in Marianne Williamson as much, not the same way. She has a larger perspective, a spiritual perspective. And she also understands the healing process of crisis and other things which I highly support. And that's why I wrote a book on her and the work, the phenomenon that she's creating, both on the forces against her and the forces for what she represents. So that's the focus of the book, not her personality. So Michael Moore has to come to understand, as any others who want to quickly on the left cast this, and continually to cast these people as terrorists, again, without talking to them, knowing them, interviewing them. And yeah, you're not going to like it. You're going to argue that's hate speech. They don't have, they're abusing their rights. So why should they have rights? Let's take them away and throw them in prison. You're going into just a mess. Now, I'm not saying that these people ought not to be made criminally responsible for breaking the law. We got to watch our words. We got to watch our language. We got to watch how we're slinging back the darts that were thrown at us, because I certainly come more from that left orientation towards political progression, but I'm not a rightist or a leftist. I'm an integralist. I won't go into that, but that's another thing that I will write about and talk about and publish on. So we can have further conversations. Thank you, folks. This was probably long enough. I've given some just tidbits of areas of strengths and weaknesses to the Michael Moore discourse. And he is a phenomenon. His followers and his haters, massive phenomenon. He's very important. I hope you check out his work on the good side and look for some of these critiques as well. And let's educate ourselves better. And that's my last statement for Michael Moore is educate yourself, man. Let's upgrade. Let's do it together. We're allies. And when I say that, I say open your porous boundaries from your Americanist love of America and hate for those who want to break down America, without getting caught in all that emotional polarization immediately. I'm not saying there isn't some of that real and important to deal with and manage and transform, but if I don't see that open-mindedness, I basically am going to say, Michael Moore, you're still coming from a fear-based point of view, and it will skew the way you educate. You are a critical thinker, and you are a pedagogue, a teacher of people. Andragogue, if you want to put it in adult education terms. And that populist education that you do is so important. I also think you could be president of the United States. You would make a good president. My wife agreed at one point years ago. We said this because you have ability to kind of talk to that right wing and be part of them in that working class, and that many of them are, and that kind of certain simplicity and the humor. You have amazing skills for a president. It would take some refinement too, as with Marianne Williamson, some really good skills for being a president. And yet, as I say in the book, as well I've said on videos, she also has refinements that have to be made as well and upgrade their education about some of the things I'm speaking about, but not just from me. And I'm not the only one to tell them, and I'm not telling them. I'm suggesting that that is an openness to new educational ways of thinking and new paradigms of thinking. And ultimately, I'm willing to offer a fearlessness perspective to them and the world, to anyone who will listen. And I've been doing this for 35 plus years of how to think from a non-fear-based place. Thanks so much for listening today.